It is a profound, deeply isolating internal barrier that silently compromises the social reality of some of the most intellectually capable adults. You step into a casual social gathering, a workplace lounge, or a family event, and your conscious mind genuinely desires to experience a sense of light, effortless connection with the people around you. Yet, the literal second you attempt to engage in standard small talk or casual pleasantries, a cold sensation of total alienation settles into your chest. While everyone else appears to be laughing, bonding, and navigating the social terrain with fluid ease, your brain feels completely locked outside the loop. Your mind operates like a high-powered radar system that cannot stop scanning the room, analyzing micro-expressions, evaluating speech patterns, and calculating the underlying motives of every interaction. You find yourself utterly unable to participate in the natural, unscripted flow of human warmth, leaving you feeling profoundly lonely even when surrounded by a crowded room of peers. Most people evaluate this painful barrier and assume it is a sign of basic social anxiety, arrogance, or a defective personality trait. They force themselves to try charisma trends, read self-help advice, or copy popular behavioral hacks, assuming their social skills are broken. But the reality behind this exhausting mental isolation has nothing to do with your capacity for empathy or your worth. What you are experiencing is an acute, predictable biological consequence of hyperactive cognitive processing networks. Your mind is not failing. It is simply processing social data at a density that your evolutionary survival mechanisms interpret as a structural threat. To decipher the mechanical origin of this cognitive loneliness, we must look at a specialized web of brain regions known as the salience network, heavily anchored in the anterior insula and the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex. The primary biological duty of the salience network is to act as your mind's internal filter, continuously scanning the millions of bytes of data entering your senses and deciding which details are important enough to bring to your conscious attention. In an average brain, the salience network operates at a highly conservative baseline, filtering out the background noise of social cues so the individual can relax and enjoy the emotional atmosphere of a conversation. However, in individuals with high analytical intelligence, this network operates in a state of chronic, hyperactive overdrive. It treats every single social microstimulus as a high-priority data point. When someone shifts their posture, delays their response by a fraction of a second, or uses a subtle variance in their vocal tone, your salience network flags the event as an urgent anomaly. This forces your prefrontal cortex to immediately execute complex, energy-expensive analytical calculations to decode the hidden meaning behind the behavior. Your brain completely loses the ability to simply experience the interaction, because your internal filters have turned a casual conversation into a high-stakes, exhausting mathematical problem. This relentless social analysis is heavily driven by the hyper-expansion of a cognitive framework known as theory of mind, governed by the temporoparietal junction and the medial prefrontal cortex. Theory of mind is the crucial biological capacity that allows humans to attribute mental states, such as beliefs, desires, intents, and knowledge, to themselves and others, essentially allowing us to simulate what is happening inside another person's consciousness. For a highly analytical adult, this simulation engine operates with a terrifying level of complexity. When you speak to someone, your brain doesn't just process their words, it simultaneously runs multiple parallel simulations of their potential thoughts, their hidden insecurities, their expectations of you, and their judgment of your performance. You are essentially trying to read 3 chess moves ahead in a game that was meant to be entirely casual. This creates an immediate state of cognitive clutter and perspective overload. The sheer volume of simulated data completely chokes your working memory, leaving your mind temporarily paralyzed. You cannot find the words for spontaneous humor or natural emotional mirroring, because your internal architecture is entirely consumed by the exhausting metabolic demands of trying to mathematically map out another human being's subconscious reality. The immediate physical consequence of this perspective overload is a profound biological phenomenon known as cortical inhibition. As we have established across this archive, your advanced prefrontal cortex requires an immense amount of blood flow and glucose to run complex analytical simulations. When your social networks and simulation engines are running hot during an interaction, they aggressively redirect the brain's finite metabolic energy away from your primitive intuitive centers, specifically the limbic system and the basal ganglia, which govern raw emotional expression, spontaneous gut reactions, and natural behavioral synchrony. This results in a severe localized power outage. The internal mechanism that allows an adult to naturally mirror another person's body language, share a spontaneous laugh, or utter an unedited, heartfelt thought is completely offline. Your conscious mind is forced to assume full manual control over your entire social presence. You have to consciously calculate your eye contact, manually modulate your vocal tone, and script your responses in advance just to appear normal. This manual execution strips the interaction of its natural emotional chemistry, making you appear stiff, distant, or overly formal to others, completely preventing the very sense of light, effortless connection your consciousness is desperately searching for. The exhausting friction of casual social settings is also heavily aggravated by a distinct neurochemical mismatch within your brain's reward pathways. Human social bonding is naturally reinforced by a calculated burst of dopamine and oxytocin inside the nucleus accumbens, which fires when individuals share commonalities, validate each other's experiences, or engage in routine social grooming behaviors like small talk. For an average brain, discussing the weather, casual sports, or surface-level personal updates provides a healthy chemical baseline that makes the interaction feel deeply satisfying and safe. However, in highly analytical individuals, the prefrontal cortex requires high levels of conceptual complexity, novel abstract patterns, and intellectual depth to trigger that same dopaminergic reward response. When you are forced to participate in low-resolution, surface-level conversations, your reward circuitry goes completely dark. The chemical highlighting pen is capped. The brain detects a severe prediction error, registering zero metabolic value in the exchange. Small talk doesn't just feel boring to you, it introduces a genuine neurochemical starvation state. You find yourself standing in the group experiencing a heavy wave of mental fatigue and existential emptiness, completely because your brain has starved your consciousness of the vital dopamine required to feel connected to the moment. To fully comprehend the mechanics of this cognitive isolation, we must evaluate how a hyperactive mind completely hijacks your selective attention filters via the reticular activating system, or the RAAs. The RAAs acts as the primary gatekeeper for your consciousness, deciding which environmental details enter your active awareness, and which are discarded as background noise. When you possess a highly analytical baseline, your RAS takes its filtering instructions directly from your current intellectual values. It optimizes your attention to track logic, structural consistency, abstract concepts, and objective facts. When you enter a casual social environment where conversations are naturally driven by emotion, hyperbole, subjective storytelling, and logical contradictions, your RAS experiences severe friction. It interprets the unrefined, informal structure of casual human communication as chaotic noise rather than valuable signal. Your brain actively filters out the emotional warmth and vulnerability being offered by others because it is hyper-focused on the lack of conceptual substance or logical consistency in their words. You become trapped inside an insulated cognitive filter where your brain actively deletes the nonverbal cues of human bonding, leaving your conscious mind to conclude that you are completely incompatible with the population around you. While your selective filters are analyzing the environment for logic, Your medial prefrontal cortex is running an automated status calculation that completely distorts your social self-image. Your brain calculates your social competence and belonging by running continuous comparisons based on social comparison theory. However, this comparison engine operates on a highly asymmetric dataset. You experience your own internal reality from the inside out, meaning you are intimately aware of your internal processing friction, your calculated eye contact, your moments of severe social awkwardness, and the silent panic running through your nervous system. In contrast, you only experience the external reality of your peers from the outside in. You only see their fluid laughter, their effortless posture, and their seamless conversational transitions. Your analytical brain automatically compares your raw, chaotic, unedited internal blooper reel with everyone else's highly polished external highlight reel. The system detects a massive structural mismatch. It reasons that if everyone else appears naturally calm and connected while you feel intensely manual and isolated, you must be a uniquely defective outsider who lacks the fundamental human hardware required for belonging, transforming a universal processing delay into a deeply personal feeling of psychological isolation. To understand why the human brain reacts to social isolation with such an intense, agonizing wave of existential dread, we must leave our safe modern contexts and evaluate the harsh survival realities of our evolutionary history. For over 99% of human history, your survival was entirely dependent on absolute conformity and integration within a highly unified hunter-gatherer tribe. The primitive group relied on a shared, uniform cognitive model of the world to coordinate hunting, defense, and resource allocation. Within these ancient structures, an individual who exhibited a highly deviant, hyper-analytical, or unconventional way of processing reality represented a potential threat to the tribe's ideological unity and behavioral predictability. Intellectual deviation was a high-risk gamble that could easily lead to social ostracization. Therefore, the human nervous system developed a highly conservative defense mechanism designed to keep you aligned with the group baseline. The intense loneliness you feel when you cannot connect intellectually is an evolutionary alarm system. The amygdala treats the absolute lack of conceptual alignment with your immediate peers as an immediate survival crisis, screaming that you are drifting away from the tribal protective circle and are about to be cast out into the wilderness to die alone. The persistent feeling of isolation is also heavily driven by a structural limitation known to cognitive psychologists as the paradigm gap. A paradigm is the foundational framework of concepts, values, and assumptions that an individual uses to filter and understand reality. Highly analytical adults naturally build complex, abstract, and heavily systems-based paradigms to make sense of the world. You look past surface events and automatically track underlying patterns, long-term trajectories, and systemic mechanisms. However, the vast majority of human social interaction relies on a much simpler, event-based or purely emotional paradigm. When you attempt to share your systems-based perspective in a casual setting, you encounter a severe conceptual mismatch. The people around you cannot read your data map. They respond to your complex abstract thoughts with blank stares, polite deflections, or a rapid shift back to surface topics. This creates an immediate cognitive barrier. The prefrontal cortex translates this lack of conceptual resonance into a profound realization of mental isolation. You realize that you cannot share the true contents of your mind without translating your thoughts into a low-resolution language, forcing your consciousness to live in a state of permanent psychological exile, even when your physical body is fully integrated within a group. The long-term danger of navigating this cognitive loneliness is the severe accumulation of allostatic load caused by maintaining a constant social mask. When your brain convinces you that your natural hyper-analytical self is entirely incompatible with social spaces, it forces you to construct a highly calculated artificial persona to navigate adulthood. You learn to memorize popular culture references, practice superficial small-talk formulas, and fake emotional enthusiasm just to hide your internal isolation and blend in with the group. From a neurological perspective, running this artificial persona requires an immense continuous expenditure of executive energy. Your prefrontal cortex is forced to dedicate a massive portion of its baseline metabolic fuel to real-time impression management and self-monitoring. Over years of continuous execution, this chronic energy expenditure completely exhausts your nervous system's buffering capacity. The high allostatic load causes a systemic downregulation of your serotonin and dopamine receptors, plunging your mind into a flat, gray state of social exhaustion and burnout. The energy required to keep the mask from slipping becomes so overwhelming that your resilience collapses entirely, forcing you to view social interaction not as a source of nourishment, but as an exhausting performance that you must completely avoid just to survive. When we systematically evaluate this complete neurobiology of cognitive isolation, we can perform an objective somatic autopsy on our loneliness and completely strip it of its psychological terror. The next time you step into a casual setting and feel the cold weight of alienation settle into your chest, you must instantly recognize the mechanical order of operations inside your flesh. The racing pulse, the tight throat, and the internal voice telling you that you are fundamentally broken or unlovable are not profound emotional truths. They are not an indication that you are defective, that you do not belong on this planet, or that you are doomed to be forever alone. They are simply the physical, predictable consequence of an overtaxed salience network and a hyperactive simulation engine running a high-resolution data search inside an evolutionary brainstem that doesn't understand the casual nature of modern social spaces. The terrifying thoughts of permanent isolation your mind manufactures during this window are completely empty. They are nothing more than a desperate fictional script written by an energy-starved prefrontal cortex trying to find a reason for a raw chemical dopamine deficit in your reward circuitry. The thoughts are not insights. They are simply the neurological exhaust produced by a high-performing engine that is struggling to idle in a slow-moving room. Breaking the cycle of chronic cognitive loneliness requires you to completely change how you interpret the internal feeling of alienation. You cannot force your hyperactive salience network to stop analyzing microexpressions, and you cannot demand your prefrontal cortex to instantly downregulate its capacity for logic. Your brain is structurally wired to process data at a high baseline. Your objective is not to wait for your analytical mind to magically disappear before you feel connected, but to change your relationship to the processing friction. When the wave of social isolation hits your chest, you must expect the biological delay. Instead of engaging with the terrifying thoughts of defectiveness, faking enthusiasm, or running back into a social mask, your only goal is to look at the tension objectively, accept the unspent cortical energy, and say to yourself, "This is not an emotional failure. This is just my hyperactive machine attempting to decode a simple room." By removing the moral shame and the mental narrative from the sensation, you give your nervous system the time it needs to lower its threat response, accept your unique processing baseline, and naturally return your body to a state of safe authority. Thank you for watching this explanation. If you want to understand more about the silent biological mechanics that dictate our daily human struggles, consider subscribing to the channel. This library is a growing archive dedicated strictly to the deep science of why the mind and body operate this way. No trends, no shortcuts, just the objective truth of our shared biology. Explore the rest of the archive to understand your mind, and I will see you in the next breakdown.